Hello, and welcome to the Expendable Men episode of Sleep Money, your guide to the business and finance news of the week. I'm Felix Salmon of Axios. Stacey Marie Ishmael is here loving the idea of Expendable Men.
Delighted.
Emily Peck is here of Fundrise, and you kind of like the idea too, right? You kind of think that we should be throwing billionaires into space because we can afford to lose a few of them.
100%, and I'll explain it to you in just a minute, Felix.
So we're going to talk about billionaires in space and how expendable they are. We are going to talk about the Texas two-step, the way that Johnson & Johnson might be trying to avoid some of its tort liabilities. It's more interesting than it sounds, honestly. We have a great conversation about work, expenses, meetings, all of that kind of stuff. And is it racist to ask people to put expenses on their personal cards and then get it reimbursed from the company? Spoiler alert, yes, it is. We have a Slate Plus segment on private markets, basically where people can buy and sell shares in private companies. It's all coming up on Slate Money.
Support for this podcast comes from TD Ameritrade. Their innovation is fueled by the feedback of serious traders like you. When they heard you wanted a version of Thinkorswim you could access anywhere, no download necessary, they built it. And when they heard you needed to execute a preset trade strategy in seconds, they made a build on that build. Your feedback inspired them to create Thinkorswim Web and continues to push them to make sure the entire suite of platforms never stops getting better. Because platforms this innovative aren't just made for traders, they're made by them. Thinkorswim Trading from TD Ameritrade.
Support for this podcast comes from Invent Together. I bet you didn't know that inventing activity by Black inventors peaked in 1899, and it has never recovered. Black and Hispanic college graduates patented half the rate of white college graduates. That's just one of the reasons why you need to know about Invent Together. When our patent system gets more diverse, our nation will get stronger and more successful. Find out how you can help diverse inventors and unleash economic opportunity at inventtogether.org.
So, Emily, this was the week where everyone on Twitter competed to come up with the rudest thing they could think of to say about Jeff Bezos and his 11-minute ride into space. And in true Slate style, you're going to take the contrarian point of view here and say it's actually not that bad, even though his spaceship really did look like a penis.
Yeah, his spaceship looked like a penis. He had a cowboy hat on. Well, Jeff Bezos went and touched space. I was going to make a really dirty joke, but I'm not going to.
It's too early.
He went up to space, and he touched it, and he came back down. And it was as ludicrous as you could imagine. And this was 1 or 2 weeks after Richard Branson did the same thing. And Branson hired Stephen Colbert to be there. And Khalid performed after. And it was a big thing. And everyone, yes, Felix, everyone took to Twitter to be like, people are still starving on Earth. There are real problems on Earth. And billionaires are going to space. The worst people in the world, they can't stay on Earth and solve our problems. They're going to space. And this is like rich man's folly. And this is just awful, and they should pay their taxes, and on and on. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, look, billionaires can go to space and it's fine. These men have so much money that going to space isn't what's stopping them from using their money to pay taxes or to solve climate change or raise wages at their companies. Like, it's not a real argument to just be like, they can't go to space because they have stuff to do on Earth. They actually could do both. A. B, going to space is dangerous. And I feel like if anyone's going to take that risk on, it shouldn't have to be like a Sally Ride figure. It should be like Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson, which I hope their relatives aren't listening, but like, I'm not worried about them. I don't care what happens to them when they go up into space. Like, they're building these risky rockets. Who better to test them than them, right? Who better to take that risk on than them? The third thing I would say is, and I might be wrong, but look, going to space has some value. Like, NASA has been behind many interesting inventions and technologies that have helped us over the years, like hearing aid implants or memory foam or aluminum
Teflon.
blankets or Teflon. Or, I mean, there's like, if you go to their website, has a big list of inventions. So maybe something good will come of this. Like most technologies start out as something that rich people use. And I hate to use the word trickle down. And I'm sure you guys can rip me apart for this in a minute. But like the cell phone used to cost what? $2,000 to have a cell phone. Now we all have a cell phone. Strangely, they now also
still cost $2,000.
But for some reason, that's no longer an obstacle to most people having one. And they're very important. It's okay. Like rich billionaires can be absurd and go to space and risk their lives. And I just don't see why we have to like get all upset about it. Like there's plenty of other stuff to get upset about. I mean, you get upset because of that cowboy hat, and the Times has a piece out on Friday as we're recording, and the headline's like, "Don't be a Bezos," and argues that Jeff Bezos is having like this midlife crisis right in front of our eyes.
Which he clearly is.
Surely.
Like a dentist buying a Lamborghini, Jeff Bezos takes the rocket ship shaped like a penis to space, whatever. But bottom line, I get upset about a lot of stuff rich people do, and like this one,
So I think there are two different flavors of complaint here. One is what I will call the Gil Scott-Heron complaint, which you've talked about,
yes.
and which, as you say, was all over Twitter. The lyrics to Whitey on the Moon basically are literally, it says, "I can't pay no doctor bill, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still, but Whitey's on the moon." And you're like, come on, can we get our priorities in order here? I understand that complaint, and I also totally understand your pushback against that complaint, which is this is not a zero-sum game. And if Jeff Bezos didn't go to space, he wouldn't be paying Gil Scott-Heron's doctor's bill. So I can see both sides of that one. The more germane complaint, I think, is specifically about Branson and Bezos, and specifically not about Elon Musk, who is the actually successful space billionaire. SpaceX is a very valuable company that does actually useful things in terms of putting satellites into orbit and doing good things in space. Elon, is a friend of Richard Branson's, and it's all like, you go, Mr. Richard, and go into space and have fun. But that's not his ambition. The thing that Bezos and Branson are talking about is this vision of humans in space, humans colonizing space. Bezos has this ludicrous idea of moving all of Earth's heavy industry into space so that nothing pollutes on planet Earth anymore. Or Elon, for that matter, has this vision of colonizing Mars. All of this is completely ludicrous. All of this is incredibly stupid. At some point, we will have Manu Sardia back on this show, and he will be able to explain in chapter and verse just how unbelievably ludicrous and stupid it is. But the dream of putting humans into space is dumb. This is why we basically haven't cared about it that much for the past 50 years. Like, it was a big deal to put Whitey on the moon. But then we realized that space exploration is not something where you really need humans to do it most of the time. You can do it much more effectively with machines and robots. And this seems like a retrograde step to me. All of this effort, all of this money devoted to allowing someone to say, I went to space, which has no utility at all, gussied up in this idea that, like, at some point humanity will break free of the shackles of gravity holding us to Earth. And this is insane. It's never going to happen. And I think it's possibly harmful if people believe that's actually possible. Maybe they won't care about saving this planet we're on because, hey, we can just move to another one.
But didn't sending Whitey to the moon lead down the road to technology that is really important, like satellites, for example, the stuff that SpaceX is doing? So like maybe this space race, the billionaire space race, does lead to, I mean, you're saying it's stupid to think that like there could be some technological advances, but maybe I just don't know enough.
SpaceX has technological advances for sure, and people have been awed at the way that its rockets just land back down beautifully on landing pads and get to be reused. I 100% buy the idea of innovation and technology coming out of the space race. Mm-hmm. I am seeing that with SpaceX. I'm frankly not seeing that with either Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin.
Right. But it could be that like Blue Origin simply existing and Jeff Bezos being annoying and like trying to start a little competition with Elon Musk helps drive innovation somehow. I can't believe I'm taking this side of the argument. But I mean, we do need to have innovation. And if it comes on the heels of people like that taking big risks with their lives to go to space, I say I'm all for it.
All right, Stacey, you're going to give us the final verdict here.
I recommend that everyone read a novella by N.K. Jemisin called Emergency Skin, in which she extremely accurately, as she often does, parodies and describes this conversation that we're having right now. Hilariously, it is only available on Amazon.
Oh, no.
Wow. Like that was also the point at which I think everyone really turned about Bezos, was when he landed back down and he says, I want to thank everyone who's ever bought anything on Amazon because you paid for this. And we were all like,
workers.
And the workers. And we were like, oh my God, like you are saying the quiet bit out loud.
Completely delusional man at this point. Does anyone tell this man the truth? Probably not. Still, I am okay with all of it. It's fine. I'm on record. Send me your hate mail. Don't send me hate mail. I'm very much kidding. Send it to Felix only.
Send me the email for Emily and I will read it and burn it and I won't forward it on to Emily.
Take one for the team, Felix. Good job.
Exactly.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Saving money on your car insurance is easy with Progressive. It's an average savings of over $750 for customers who switch and save. In fact, customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts on their auto policy with Progressive, including discounts just for starting a quote online or having multiple vehicles on their policy. Get your quote online at progressive.com and see how much you could be saving. National annual average auto insurance savings by new customers surveyed in 2019. Potential savings will vary. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations. This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Saving money on your car insurance is easy with Progressive. It's an average savings of over $750 for customers who switch and save. In fact, customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts on their auto policy with Progressive, including discounts just for starting a quote online or having multiple vehicles on their policy. Get your quote online at progressive.com and see how much you could be saving. National annual average auto insurance savings by new customers surveyed in 2019. Potential savings will vary. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations.
Let's move on to Texas, because
my favorite state.
It's where Stacey is right now. It is where the Blue Origin rocket launched from. It is obviously at the forefront of technological innovation. And by technological innovation, I mean clever little things that people can do in bankruptcy, which don't even look like bankruptcy, but manage to avoid paying out lots of money to women with mesothelioma and ovarian cancer. What I am talking here about is this Reuters report. Reuters has been at the forefront of reporting on the baby powder that Johnson & Johnson has made for decades, and that is made from talc, and talc is a naturally occurring ingredient that also often seems to be mixed up with asbestos. And there is credible evidence that there was asbestos in Johnson & Johnson baby powder, and that asbestos wound up causing mesothelioma and ovarian cancer. That evidence is so credible that a recent case in Missouri, brought by 22 women, awarded over $4 billion in damages against those women, and Johnson & Johnson appealed it, and it did get reduced to 2 women. There are 30,000 women behind them who have already sued, and who knows how many more after that, because these things take a long time to show up. This is obviously an existential risk to Johnson & Johnson. And so what is J&J doing? But they are considering this thing called the Texas two-step, also known as, basically they're doing what under Texas law is called a divisive merger. Now, normally a merger is where you get 2 separate companies and turn them into one. This is a Texas version of that, which is where you take one company and turn it into 2, but it's not a spin-off, which would be a fraudulent conveyance. This is an amount of detail we don't need to go into and would be completely illegal under bankruptcy law. It's a merger, so it's not a conveyance or a transfer at all. And the idea is the J&J splits into two companies. One of them has a couple $1 billion to pay off the claimants and will then immediately file for bankruptcy. And then the rest of J&J just gets to carry on with all of its wealth and all of its equity and is basically untouchable by any claimant. Stacey, what's your view of how this is even possible in Texas?
I have a lot of views about how things are possible in Texas. This very much confirms my priors, I would say. I do think it has been interesting. Governor Greg Abbott has been very explicitly pro all sorts of, hey, come here, do things, right? Whether it is launch your rockets, build your electric car plants, file for different kinds of, actually file for bankruptcy, or in this case, engage in this kind of maneuver in a way that is supposed to convey Texas's general business friendliness. And that is part of kind of a years-long attempt to say, if you like money but think the people around you are too liberal, don't go to California or New York, come to Texas instead.
Or even if you like money and just don't much care about humans at all. Like the humans who live in Van Horn, Texas, where the rocket launch took place, they just get steamrolled, basically. And SpaceX basically owns the town in Texas as well. And if you're unlucky enough to be one of the humans in those towns, you just have to kind of vacate your home.
Texas is regulation light as it relates to the rights of individuals versus certain corporations, unless, of course, you're talking about trans kids and abortion, in which case the legislation gets very intense.
Or the right to walk around with a gun anywhere you want to go.
Well, no, that's super chill. You can do that. Like, no permit needed.
You know what I don't understand? I'm just riffing here, but like I was reading this morning again for the billionth time about Johnson & Johnson and how it is held up in like marketing classes as this example of a company that is trusted by consumers because once upon a time, Tylenol was tampered with and Johnson & Johnson was like upfront about that and apologized for it. Blah, blah, blah.
Recalled it all,
Recalled it all, didn't keep it a secret. And this example is held up like in case studies and like business books as look how trustworthy this company is for like taking responsibility. And now we're sitting here in 2021 and we're talking about how the company is essentially trying to escape responsibility for giving all these women cancer, right? Fatal cancer. And yet I never read about that in the case studies or the business books. This Tylenol maneuver lives on as this like legend of J&J.
Case studies are written by the victors, baby.
And J&J is still doing their name is in the news constantly lately.
$5 billion they paid to settle a suit with state attorneys general about distributing opioids. And again, that was one of those things where they were like, we will not admit any guilt, but we will pay you $5 billion on the proviso that we never need to pay another cent ever again. We'll cap it at that.
I think someone needs to go back and amend some of those business books because I don't see why you're still trusting this company.
And we should say, like, both in terms of what you're talking about and also to provide Johnson & Johnson's side of the story, like Johnson & Johnson still very vehemently denies that like asbestos in baby powder caused any kind of illnesses at all, or cancer or mesothelioma or anything. So to your point about taking responsibility and saying, yes, this is on us and doing something about it, that's the exact opposite of what they're doing. They're denying that there was any connection, and this is just, and like I am not going to try and
I don't want to
sit here and determine which side is right. But all I can say is that almost regardless of which side is right, the tort cases, which are coming thick and fast against Johnson & Johnson, are an existential risk, as we have seen from Missouri. You don't need to lose too many of those court cases, and you really do have to, like the entire company has to file for bankruptcy.
And that's what they should do instead of going to Texas and splitting up?
Well, I'm not being normative here. Like, I'm not, I mean, I think what they should do is a very interesting question, and probably the answer to that question on a moral basis really does rest on whether or not they are morally culpable and whether or not there was asbestos in this baby powder and whether or not they knew about it and all of these like empirical questions. On a purely financial engineering level, the bankruptcy maneuver makes perfect sense because
Absolutely.
it caps their liabilities. And most importantly, they get to file for bankruptcy more or less wherever they want in the country, which means they can find a friendly judge who will be more sympathetic to their arguments about asbestos than the one in Missouri was. And so that alone is worth probably hundreds of billions of dollars to them.
And Texas has various bankruptcy courts that are seen as being debtor-friendly in that context.
Yeah, Texas also, we have to ask you about this, Stacey. It's the place that the NRA wanted to move to. Did I get this right? They wanted to move from New York to Texas and then file for bankruptcy in Texas, even though they weren't insolvent. And it was only the New York Attorney General who was like, no, you're based in New York and no, you can't do that, who prevented that from happening.
Indeed. Their argument was, well, we're going to reincorporate in Texas because we have strong nexus to people with guns who live there. And this makes total sense. But to your point, not a normative statement, what they were really trying to do was come to a state that is debtor-friendly, but also has really interesting legal homesteading protections, which basically says if you're going to try to sue a Texas-based company, you have to show residency, ties, nexus to Texas, for example. And so it was very clever because you're like, okay, well, all these people in New York are trying to sue you. Please move to Texas and then you will have standing, right? Ultimately, to your point, Felix, New York wasn't having it. But I think, and again, this was something that Governor Greg Abbott was like, please come by. We're great. So I think that there is very much a series of attempts by Texas to be known for technical and financial innovation in a way that should probably get covered more, frankly.
The number of businesses moving to Texas, being formed in Texas, being headquartered in Texas is amazing. And it's happening in Dallas, it's happening in Austin, it's happening in Houston. And this kind of what bleeding heart liberals who read Slate would call race to the bottom in terms of trying to give companies anything they want. And this kind of zero-sum game of who's going to have the headquarters. Texas is doing pretty well on that front.
Absolutely.
Maybe it comes back and I can only think in curses today. I don't know. Maybe it comes back and
you can curse
and bites them because
where does it bite them, Emily? In which part of their anatomy?
Felix.
In the rear, just like Stacey's. But maybe that liberalizes Texas even further. We've seen that in other places, right? In Georgia, a little bit.
I don't think there's necessarily a correlation between rich people and liberal beliefs.
I don't know. I guess I'm the defender of the rich today.
I mean, Texas is a really, really interesting state because it is absolutely at the forefront of conversations about the tension between climate and environment and the political conservatism on regulation, which actually companies themselves are like, no, actually regulate us more because this thing is cheaper. Like this degree of predictability is cheaper. And politicians are still like, no, let's not do that. You have conversations about, to Felix's point, do you have rights to not have the environment around you besmirched? If a cement plant or something else moves into your backyard, what are your claims there? How are they thinking about transit? Austin, where I live, there's been an endless conversation for years and years about why don't we have a train? Why don't we have better public transportation? And so I do think, and I agree, even more than the discussions happening in New York and California, it's a state that people should really pay more attention to and kind of be more thoughtful about in understanding how these dynamics are playing out at large scale.
Slate Money is supported by Wise, the smart new way to move money internationally. Imagine a world without borders. A world where your nationality would never limit you, where you could speak any language, travel to any place, and spend in any currency with ease. At Wise, they love the sound of that world, and they're building the money part. Wise is the world's most international account. It lets you hold and convert dozens of currencies all in one place. And you always get the real exchange rate with no markups like the banks sometimes give you. So wherever you go or wherever you need your money to go, you're ready. That means that whether you're sending money to Australia, hopping on a plane to Poland, or getting paid from France, Wise is all you need. Wise is your passport to borderless money, designed by international people for international people. Join over 10 million people and businesses and try Wise for free at wise.com/slatemoney.
Slate Money is sponsored this week by Bambee, B-A-M-B-E-E. It's for all of you folks out there who really need an HR department but maybe can't afford an entire HR manager. Those people are expensive, an average of $70,000 a year. But even if you can't afford that, you need to make sure that you stay on the right side of all of the ways that HR can come out and bite you unexpectedly. Wrongful termination suits, minimum wage requirements, labor regulations. The way you do that is you go to Bambee. They were specifically created for small businesses. You can get a dedicated HR manager, an actual human being who will help craft your HR policy, maintain your compliance for just $99 a month. With Bambee, you can change HR from your biggest liability to your biggest strength. This person is always available by phone, by email. There's real-time chat. They'll do onboarding, they'll do terminations, they'll do everything in between. This is a month-to-month thing. There's no hidden fees. You can cancel anytime. Let Bambee help you get your free HR audit today by going to Bambee.com/slate right now to schedule your free HR audit. That's Bambee.com/slate, spelled B-A-M to the BEE.com/slate. Stacey.
Hello.
You had a big tweet. Tell me about your big tweet.
I had a big tweet. Capital B, capital T. A couple of weeks ago, it might have been a week, I don't know what is time. There was a story in the Washington Post, one of their kind of work advice columns, written by a person who's like, I'm a director at work and my employer keeps trying to get me to incur thousands of dollars in expenses and then hopefully get it back later. And I shared that story with a reflection that, in my own career, particularly early in my career when I genuinely had zero money, being confronted with, Felix, we talked about this, like I moved to New York from London. I get a credit card that has a $250 credit limit. I'm trying to figure out how to put moving expenses on this thing. I'm like, I genuinely have no way to absorb the first month, last month, endless deposit question. My employer is like, oh, you just pay for it and we'll give it back to you. I'm like, you're not hearing me though. like I physically cannot pay for this thing. And it just sparked this incredible outpouring of responses from people who work at very large companies, from people who work at nonprofits, saying, hang on a minute, how come it's okay for your employer to get what is an interest-free loan to them at the expense of employees' personal finances? And so, as I do, because everything is content, I wrote this up in a newsletter for Fortune called Race Ahead, which I think is, as a connoisseur of newsletters, one of the best in the game.
Especially when it's written by you.
Absolutely. To be clear, I'm a very good newsletter writer.
It was excellent.
That kind of went more into detail on this, which is, there are so many ways in which corporations, nonprofits, organizations engage in structural and systemic discrimination through policy without even realizing it. And absolutely, some of the people who had feedback were like, well, I love my credit card points. I'm like, great. I had a $250 credit limit. That card had no points. It had something like a 24.99 interest rate before penalty. We're living in different worlds as it relates to the conversation about who has access to what.
To be clear about this is very much related to the income versus wealth. The way that...
Absolutely, yes.
Basically, in white America, if you have a lot of income, you probably have quite a lot of wealth, and you probably have a high credit limit, and you probably love those miles you get on your credit card points, and you probably pay off your credit card every month. And so you love this idea of paying expenses yourself and getting it reimbursed because it just gets you like extra warm fuzzies from your bank who give you points and miles and stuff like that.
Lounge access.
If you are a high-income Black American, you're likely to have very low wealth. You're going to have much lower credit limits. You're going to run up against overdrafts and liquidity constraints. And all of these things that the white rich Americans like, the Black rich Americans, in terms of income, often really hate. And it is a racial difference.
And Stacey makes a great point towards the end of the newsletter, or I think it's the kicker, where it's like companies say they want to do something about racial inequality. And like, here's a really easy place to start. Change your expense policy. Don't have employees putting expenses on their personal credit cards. It's not feasible, and it disproportionately would impact your Black employees. So just don't do it. Issue corporate cards, pay them off for people, and take that out of the equation.
Yeah, and don't issue those corporate cards that are like fake corporate cards, because you, the employee, still has to reimburse before you get that reimbursement, which is an increasing trend and frustrating.
Right.
And I think one of the other things about this is it's not only at the point of when you're already an employee, it often affects recruitment, right? So as we're talking about moving back to the office, there's lots of people who are like, hey, please fly to X expensive capital for interviews. And I have personally known candidates who are like, I can't afford to buy this plane ticket and book a hotel and then claim that back after from an HR department that might ghost me if I don't get this job. And these things are often invisible to the people setting the policy. Because if you are in a position at a company that's like, yeah, I come in for an interview, you're a hiring manager, you are often from a background that's like, obviously someone will be able to afford or ingest the initial cost of a plane, train, or hotel.
Yeah, it's like the conversation people have about unpaid internships. It's very similar. It's like only a certain kind of person can take the unpaid internship.
It's also worth mentioning that we are living in a world where, for very good reasons, an increasing number of people entering the workforce or looking for jobs don't have credit cards at all. There is this idea that it makes a lot of sense, which is true, to not have a credit card, to do everything on a debit card. If you are in a world where you're doing everything on a debit card, then this all becomes even worse. The idea of credit cards is that at least if the company pays you back within the credit card cycle, it doesn't hit you at all. With a debit card, you can get all those overdraft fees. You can wipe out your checking account, or you can be asked to check into a hotel where the employer has paid for the room. But when you check into the hotel is like, well, we're just going to put a hold on your debit card for any incidentals. And that hold on your card can, again, cause all of the overdraft fees and all the rest of it. These are things which really make it hard to accumulate wealth.
Yeah. And it really, I just loved, just to hammer home the point again that Stacey made, it's like, these are the real steps companies can take to do better on diversity, more than any Instagram post or white paper or
rainbows,
donation
whatever.
to an like, these is the real concrete work that needs to be done. And it's not that hard.
Yeah. So if you are listening to Slate Money and you have control over expense policies, change them.
Take a look. Are we not going to talk about meetings?
Oh, even talking about meetings makes me so sad. Let's talk about meetings. Emily, why are there so many meetings?
I don't know, Stacey. I used to be a humble reporter, and I controlled my calendar pretty nicely. And I would agree to meetings and calls, but then I'd be on deadline and I'd blow them off and everything was fine. And no one asked of me to meet with them. No managers, no one cared to meet with me. Now I am not in journalism. I am in a different place, and it's a meetings culture. A lot of work gets done in these meetings. I work remotely. They're all happening over Google Meet or Zoom or whatever. And I too took to Twitter because I wanted to know how people get work done when it's like meeting. And I mean, I did get some advice.
Which was basically cancel all the meetings.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, I could go through it if people are interested. The advice is basically either block time on your calendar so you can do work so people think you're in a meeting already. Make meetings with yourself is one piece of advice that's pretty consistent. The other thing is schedule shorter meetings because your Google Calendar will default to 30 minutes or an hour. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. And someone else just said to me, the meetings aren't getting in the way of the job. The meetings are your job, which was okay, well,
the most demoralizing
fair enough.
sentence.
Yeah, so those are the three classes of advice. And then the other thing is there was a great piece in the Journal just about meeting creep in the pandemic. Everyone's working remotely and needs to show that they're there doing work. So there are more of these check-ins happening over Zoom, which is an exhausting medium.
It is much more exhausting to have a meeting over Zoom than it is to have other meetings. Stacey's former boss, Noah Breyer, had some good rules for meetings at Percolate. I never worked for Percolate. Stacey worked for Percolate. Are you on board with the Percolate meeting rules, Stacey?
one of the things I always took away from working there, and look, I was there when I think I was like the 11th or 12th employee. This was a point of dissension between me and this one back-end engineer over who got there first. By the time I left, it was like a much bigger place. It had gotten to the point where we had like a scheduling system for the meeting rooms. But the big thing was always, what is the least number of people that have to be in this room right now, right? And like, what is the shortest and tightest way that we can move forward with this?
It was called no spectators.
Exactly.
Don't invite people to the meeting unless they need to be in the meeting. They also had the 15-minute default that Emily was talking about.
Which you can set in your Google Calendar. So strong encourage you to do that.
So, and then when we do go back into the office, if and when you start having meetings in meeting rooms again, rather than on your computer, don't bring your phone or your laptop into the meeting room. That's
Focus
a great way to
time.
keep the meeting short.
Yeah. And as a person who like loves notebooks and writing things down, I'm like, yeah, this is great. I've got my printout here. It's all good. But I do think that FOMO, Emily, to your point, is a big driver of meetings, right? And one of the things I've been fascinated in terms of, especially the CEO rhetoric about why we have to get back into the office, is because they like knowing everything about what everybody's doing at all times, and not being able to see people and make sure they're doing the job is really stressful if you have a command and control management style. And so these meetings start piling up, not only because people are like, I don't want to be neglecting my staff, but also because I'm like, how else will I know if they're doing any work? And that's a trust problem more than it is a meeting problem. Or it's a problem that's not just solved by meetings.
A lot of meetings should just be a phone call. A lot of meetings should just be a Slack channel.
Sure, more Slack things.
There is value, I think, in, like, I've worked in places where you never knew what was going on. No one's ever telling you what the strategy is, what the plan is editorially. There is value, I think, in getting together and like hearing about stuff. It doesn't have to be like an all hands or something, but like it's nice to kind of know what's going on at the place where you're working.
Yeah.
And it does feel
But
weird.
why does
now
everyone need to learn what's going on at exactly the same time of exactly the same day on a Zoom call with each other?
Felix,
There are
remember
better
how we
ways.
talked about you not being a manager? This is the question that you ask if you've never had somebody be like exceptionally upset that another person found out a thing 7 hours before they did.
Like
That
to
is
know
real.
what's up. That is definitely real.
And I think the main thing is, going back to kind of the rules that Percolate have, like people impose these kinds of rules because most people are bad at meetings, right? Like I had a strict rule at a lot of places where I'm like, do not put a meeting on my calendar with no agenda. It's not happening. I'm not just going to show up in a room and then we're going to be like, so what are we here to talk about? Absolutely not. And that was both because I like to be prepared and because I hate meetings. And so like if I have to be in one, I want it to be useful. And then you've got the power dynamics, right? I worked at a place where you might be working on projects that even your boss wouldn't know about. And so you very quickly had to get over the idea of I'm being left out of all the meetings. Because like, yeah, you literally are being left out of meetings constantly. And that's a good discipline. But again, that comes down to clarity about what you're responsible for, how you will know the things that you are responsible for, and how you will be rewarded for doing those things.
One thing my new manager said to me, because I was asking him, like, how do I deal with this meeting situation? And he was like, don't do standing meetings. That's a recipe for agendaless, like, hey, how are
Catch-ups.
you? Yeah. Just take those off and make sure you have actually something to talk about. And you can tell people I told you that. And I was like, great.
In terms of the management thing, I do think that in well-functioning organizations, a large part of the job of a manager is to have meetings so that their
Correct.
employees do not have to.
Yes.
Absolutely. If you are not protecting your people from drama, get a different job.
Let's have a numbers round. Emily, do you have a number?
I have a number. I wrote it in a Google Doc because I ran out of index cards. Okay.
Disaster.
Seriously, very traumatic. My number is 150. That is 150 euros, which is the amount each woman on the Norwegian volleyball team was fined because they wore shorts to play volleyball instead of bikini bottoms.
This was almost my number.
The rules. Oh my God. Yeah, these women were like, so the rules stipulate that women must wear these like skimpy little bikini bottoms that can't be any more than 4 inches. Meanwhile, the men who play volleyball, their shorts can be 4 inches above the knee, which that's a lot more material. And the only other rule for the men is that the shorts be not too baggy. So the Norwegian volleyball team, the women on
handball.
is it handball?
It's handball.
Okay.
Beach handball, which I learned is a different thing from volleyball.
I
apparently.
didn't realize. Thank you, Stacey.
You're welcome.
Beach handball, they were like, this is absurd. And they protested by wearing shorts. They still have crop tops on, by the way. Like, they still look amazing. And they were fined. And it doesn't seem like there's going to be any change in this area.
I will quote the one and only Boris Johnson here when the when the Olympics were in London in 2012. Boris Johnson was the mayor of London, and when he was trying to get Londoners enthused about the Olympics, because Londoners are grumpy and they didn't much like the idea of hosting the Olympics, and when he was getting into the full Olympics for it, his actual direct quote was, "There are semi-naked women playing beach volleyball glistening like wet otters." This is basically everything you need to know about.
Why does Boris Johnson find otters attractive?
That is the question.
Like, why is that the go-to metaphor? I have questions. Okay.
Otters are cute. There'd be a Netflix show about that. A Netflix
No,
show
absolutely not.
about people and otters. No? Okay.
Nope.
Just an
Hard.
idea. It's free.
That octopus show is disturbing enough.
My number is $300,000, which is the amount of money that Walmart had to pay after they got found guilty of discrimination against a disabled employee. This employee had Down syndrome and really needed a bunch of very strict scheduling and routine. And then they just started mixing up the routine and the schedule for no particular reason. And it all ended very badly with them firing the employee. And the employee sued and won. And the jury awarded a fine of $125 million. And this was a clear message from the jury to Walmart saying, like, do not do this. Your employment behavior is terrible and you have to stop doing it and pay $125 million. And Walmart sort of said, haha, under federal law,